Hi buddies, Marvin here from TechBeeroll.com, where we do unboxings, reviews, and sexy B-rolls. And today I'm giving you my full review of the new REALME 7i, the last one from the latest REALME 7 series. In this video, we'll talk about its design, construction, features, and of course, performance benchmarks, battery life, gaming, camera, and everything in between. With that being said, let's get into it. Alright guys, as usual, I've already released a dedicated unboxing and first impressions of the smartphone, which you can check out here. But essentially, inside the box, we have the usual accessory box that houses the SIM ejector pin, a couple of paperwork, and a free jelly case. We also have here inside the box the 18-watt quick charge power brick, the USB Type-C charging cable, and the REALME 7i smartphone itself. At first look and touch, the front looks clean with relatively thin bezels and rounded corners, with a cutout on the upper left corner to make way for the selfie camera with a Sony IMX471 sensor. We also have a subtle earpiece here on the upper center that's almost invisible, adding to the whole sleek and clean look of the front side. We'll talk about the display later, but for now, let's take a look around the smartphone. Looking at the top side, we don't have anything here, while looking all the way on the other side, we have the downward firing speaker, a USB Type-C port, the microphone, and the 3.5mm headphone jack. Flipping it on the left side, we have the SIM card tray that supports dual nano SIM cards and a micro SD card, while flipping it on the right side, we have the volume rocker and the power button. As you can tell, it also has the chamfered edges that I personally prefer, helping with the grip. I also prefer this kind of button layout with all the buttons located on one side so that you can easily reach them using your thumb, and that you can also lay the smartphone sideways without accidentally activating any button. Now, looking at the back, this is where most of the unique and interesting features of the smartphone are located. As you can tell, the back finish of the REALME 7i has this sort of two-tone design element with a darker tone and a shinier surface on the top part, while the bottom part has this sort of diffused glossy finish that softens the light reflections more than the top side, which overall makes for a unique, sleek, and gorgeous aesthetics. However, in return, being a glossy finish, it is also relatively fingerprint magnet. But like I said in my first impressions video, there's no denying that when this thing is clean, it is absolutely beautiful. Here at the back, we also have the REALME logo located on the lower left corner, a fingerprint reader on the upper center, and of course the quad camera setup, which features a 64MP main camera, an 8MP ultra-wide angle lens, a 2MP macro lens, and a 2MP depth sensor with a small flash. Speaking of the camera, what I quickly noticed with this is that the ultra-wide angle lens tends to produce warmer toned images compared to the 1x, 2x, and 5x, and that the latter three lenses produces images with a bit more contrast. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing because it will depend on your personal preference. For me, I like the warmer tone of the ultra-wide angle lens, especially the fact that you will typically use it for landscape photos, which is good to bring some warmth and saturation to the trees and the environment. But in general, the ultra-wide angle lens, the 1x and 2x, produces fairly decent images with substantial saturation, contrast, and details without crushing the shadows and overblowing the highlights too much. Essentially, you can get pretty balanced images with this quad camera setup that is quite substantial for social media posting. As expected, the details, resolution, and clarity of the 5x zoom is not the best, but can still get handy in some certain situations. As for the 16MP selfie camera, it can also produce decent images for both the normal photo mode and the portrait mode with some background separation, albeit not perfect in terms of edge detection, especially when it comes to hair strands. Overall, I'd say the images produced by the quad camera setup of the REALME 7i is fairly usable, especially in good lighting condition. Now, lastly, here at the back, the fingerprint sensor is nicely located on the usual spot that most of us are used to, and is easy to reach, responsive, and accurate, no problems here. Going back here in front, let's discuss about the display. So we have an HD+ 1600 by 720p resolution with only around 290 pixels per inch density. Resolution-wise, it is not the best, especially with 290 ppi, but to be honest, I find this display still pretty adequate for casual media consumption, like watching YouTube, Netflix, and just generally browsing through the user interface. And although the resolution is quite low, especially in today's standard, the image quality of this display is still pretty decent with good colors, viewing angles, contrast, and sharpness. You just won't get the details and compactness of pixels of something like a 1080p display and the deeper blacks of an OLED display, but again, this is not bad at all. Now, what it got going for its advantage in terms of the display is the 90Hz refresh rate, which is pretty awesome, giving you an overall smooth experience browsing through the user interface and for the apps that supports it. As for the speaker, it is also quite adequate with decent volume levels, low end and highs, and most importantly, mids and clear vocals. I have no major complaints about this speaker. Now, if you're sensitive about audio, you still have the headphone jack for your favorite IEMs and headphones. Now, moving inside the Realme 7i itself in terms of the user interface, like I said on my first impressions about this phone, it is still using version 1 of the Realme UI based on Android 10, which means we still have the relatively lightweight skin with only a few pre-installed apps and useful tools like the dark mode, eye comfort, Realme Share, and everything in between. And even though this is still in the early versions of this UI, I don't have any major complaints about this, and it doesn't bog down the system over time. It doesn't have any ads or anything annoying and unnecessary. Now, powering the Realme 7i smartphone, we have a Qualcomm Snapdragon 662 octa-core processor with an Adreno 610 GPU partnered with 8GB of RAM and 128GB of internal storage. This smartphone also packs a massive 5000 mAh battery, which is awesome considering that it weighs only around 188 grams. Another good thing is that it is partnered with an 18-watt quick charge power brick. We'll talk more about the battery life later, but for now, let's take a look at some performance benchmarks so that you can have an idea of how the Realme 7i performs. In terms of CPU performance, it is way behind both the Realme 7 and 7 Pro, and the same can be said in terms of GPU performance, but of course, those other two are significantly more expensive as well. But don't worry, as I will show you later on our gaming test, that the Realme 7i is not a slouch at all in terms of actual performance. Overall, the Realme 7i scored 179,399 in Antutu, and this is with the latest update version 8.25. Of course, the same scenario can be observed in Geekbench in both CPU and GPU performance. Now, in terms of battery life, with a massive 5000 mAh of battery, the Realme 7i lasted for around 10.23 hours on our usual PC Mark Work 2.0 battery life benchmark with maximum brightness and maximum volume with earphones plugged in. It lasted significantly longer than the power-hungry Realme 7 and 7 Pro. Now, in terms of charging speed using the included 18-watt quick charge power brick, I was able to fully charge the Realme 7i from 10% to 100% in about 2.4 hours. Now, I mentioned that even though the raw scores of the Realme 7i isn't that impressive in Antutu and Geekbench, I can honestly say that with just the right settings in-game, this thing can certainly perform quite decently. In Asphalt 9, out of the box, it is set to default settings, but of course, I got to set that to high quality. Now, as per experience, there are noticeable stutters here and there, but it is definitely playable for the most part. This is not a surprise since Asphalt 9 is a pretty high graphics intensive game. The best bet is to just set it to default or lower quality settings. Now, in Mobile Legends, by default, HD mode is set to off, and the graphics settings is set to medium. Of course, I turned on HD mode and bumped the graphics settings to high just to really push this phone in this game. And as per my experience, I didn't encounter any major or noticeable frame drops even during clashes and ultimates up until the end of the game. So yeah, Mobile Legends is definitely playable on this smartphone. And after around 24 minutes of continuous gaming, with an ambient temperature of around 26 degrees, the maximum temperature of the Realme 7i is only around 34 degrees. Of course, we're going to continue gaming up until an hour. So in Call of Duty Mobile, by default, it is set to medium graphics quality and medium frame rate, but as you know it, we're going to crank that up to very high and high frame rate. Now, as per my experience, Call of Duty Mobile is one of the most intensive game in terms of both CPU and GPU performance, and one of the best game to test a smartphone's thermal performance, which we'll see in a bit. But as for the actual gaming experience, I'd say even on maximum settings, I didn't encounter any major stuttering or frame drops, which is quite awesome. I actually played for quite a while and even outside filming, and it is definitely playable. Now, after around 33 minutes of gaming with an ambient temperature of around 27 degrees, the temperature of the Realme 7i is around 41 to 42 degrees, which is definitely hot to the touch, and it makes my hands sweat a bit more than I would have preferred. Moving on to finish our 1-hour gaming test, we have PUBG, and by default it is set to smooth graphics quality and medium frame rate. Unfortunately, the highest we can set this is balanced in high frame rate. The rest is not available for this device. With that being said, and with the balanced graphics quality, PUBG Mobile is definitely playable on this smartphone with these settings. I didn't encounter any significant issue or stuttering even during driving, gunfights, and just generally moving across the map. So yeah, with just the right settings, gaming with the Realme 7i is pretty decent. Now, after an hour of continuous gaming with this phone, with an ambient temperature of around 26 degrees, the temperature of the Realme 7i is only around 37 degrees, which is relatively cool. So, Call of Duty Mobile is the only game on our testing that really pushed the thermals on this phone. So, to conclude, the Realme 7i showed that even though numbers won't lie, with just the right balance in terms of settings, You can definitely utilize this smartphone even for gaming, especially with a substantial 8GB of RAM and 128GB of storage. Plenty of room for your apps and games in today's standard. But what stands out with this phone is definitely the design and decent specs that are targeted towards lifestyle application and day-to-day use case scenarios such as web browsing, media consumption, and productivity. So if you're not an avid mobile gamer that wants balls to the wall settings and just wants a capable device with a good amount of storage and multitasking capability, not to mention a battery that should last you a day or so, the Realme 7i is a pretty decent option. And there you have it guys, thank you for watching. Huge thanks to Realme for sending this in. You can get this once available from the link below. This 8GB RAM, 128GB ROM variant will be available online for 10,990 pesos in Lazada and Shopee at 12 midnight on October 22 for a limited period of time, and will be available offline via stores nationwide for 11,990 starting October 24. I will include all the necessary information in the description below. Thank you for watching, subscribe if you like this, and see you next time. Have a great day guys, you're awesome.